Hi, my name's Sharon Todd and I'm with Towards the Dreaming Funeral Services and the first Aboriginal female here in Western Australia to have a funeral service for our mob, and I'm happy to be here at my warm table with Sonia Nolan.
Sharon, thank you so much for joining me around my warm table today. It's just a delight to have you here.
You're welcome. It is delightful to be here.
I have so much I want to understand about funeral services, about yourself and your culture, and about what led you to this moment. So there's so much I'd love to cover with you today, Sharon.
Thank you. I'm happy to share that.
Sharon, I'd love to start by understanding your cultural heritage and the fact that you are a proud Kariyarra Noongar woman.
Yes, I was born here on Noongar Budja in Perth and in the 60s, the late 60s, and I grew up here thinking I'm a Noongar person and wasn't really too much aware of the connection back up north until we ended up moving back there when I was about 11, 12, and then my knowledge started growing about the connections back there with the Kariyarra people in Port Hedland. My father was from the stolen generation, so when his father, who was a Englishman, died, the three youngest children got taken off my grandmother and they were the boys were sent to New Norcia on Magumba Mission, and my auntie was sent to Sister Kate's. So we didn't have a lot of connection back to family as we were growing up, because when Dad was growing up in the mission, he was then sent out to work on stations, and eventually he retraced steps and found family and reconnected, but we were still kept very much separate. And then in 1963, I think he went back to live up north, and my sister went back as a teenager as well, and then gradually we all started moving back. My connection to Noongar country was growing up in a time when we still lived in camps down here. So there was a camp outside of Lockridge called Widgie Road Camps, and people lived in Hessian tents still when I was little.
And this is the 1970s?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, This was around then. And then there was another camp at Saunders Street. There was no houses there, down at Henley Brook. And we'd all gather, like on pension days or pay days, people would gather in the park, Guildford Park, and play two-up and play cards and drink and eat and all come together. And then if Dad wasn't working out bush, we'd be grape picking or doing other odd jobs around the city. So the referendum happened in 1967.
Which referendum is this?
The referendum to include us as Aboriginal people into the Australian Constitution. Yeah.
Because up until, I think it was 1971, because that was the year of my birth, and that's, I think, why I remember it, the early 70s, that Aboriginal people were regarded as flora and fauna
in Western Australia.
Was it just in Western Australia or in Australia?
It was just in Western Australia. So it was a time when we were still not totally accepted in society. So we were seen and not heard, basically. But I was a kid, so I didn't know any different.
So what was your experience like as a child? You know, what do you remember about living in the camp and those days at the Guildford Park where you're playing and hanging out with all of your extended family? What sort of memories do you have of that?
Well, we were always visitors because my dad did quite well, and he actually bought a house with his earnings from mining. So he started, all my family of miners, the Kariyarra side, and it was a survival technique. They used to sit out bush and yandy, which is a method of moving the hands and a Coulaman type piece of tin so that it separates the rubbish dirt from the tantalite or tin which you sell.
Yes.
So they mine to make money, and they'd fill tins up, like milk tins, sunshine milk tins, or coffee tins, and pop the lid on it and then take it into Marble Bar to sell it, because back in those days they still had the state batteries, which was a state-run crushing facility for gold and different ores, and they'd buy these minerals off us and we would buy food with the money that we made from the yandying.
And the yandying, so when you describe that, that's actually a hand sorting.
It's a hand sorting.
Of ore.
So you're holding like a coulamon that's made out of tin, so it's a hollow shape instrument, and you just shake your hands like.
Yeah, right.
And it sorts the rubbish out from
the good stuff.
From the good stuff. Bit like panning for gold.
Yes.
When you pan for gold and you're using the water to move the rocks around, you're left with the gold, the trail of gold in the end. And that's how we grew up. We grew up in mining and around gold and tantalite and all other types of materials to make money. And when I looked back into the history of my white family, right back in history in England, they were from coal mines. And
so there was a link.
So there was a link. Yeah. It's followed through. And when my grandfather met my grandmother, they actually lived out bush, and he wasn't allowed to marry her because we were the property of the state.
Right.
Under that 1905 Act plus other acts. So he went out bush and lived with her, and they mined to make a living and to feed the children. And then when they turned up with 5 children, that's when they were finally allowed to marry, and he could give his name to the children. My grandfather came from a family of 11, and they all came out on one of the first fleets to Victoria, and he came to Western Australia and married my grandmother. So back to that original question, the Noongar side of it, I suppose, is my memories are just of being with lots of family on these camps. In a child's eye, I suppose it was all exciting because there was 2-ups, there was drinking, there was party, food, there was lots of kids, and it was all very condensed. And then outside of that was where we lived up in Manning. We had a house on Salters Point. It was a brand new house. It was built, and Dad was the first person that owned it. And I went to Manning Primary School until Dad went bankrupt, and then we moved back into the bush. And I remember going back bush and not knowing any of the people, because the further we moved bush, the darker the people became.
Right.
And by the time I got to Nullagine, I was sitting in the car and I was really upset that I wasn't as dark as the people that was in Nullagine. And because they'd come to the car, they'd recognised Dad, and they were crying for their brother and hadn't seen him for years. And I'm thinking, why aren't I dark like this? And my mum thought I was scared because I was scared of the people, but I was scared because I was a fair black fella. I wasn't a dark black fella. And over the years since then, this has also come with its own set of issues, because there's so much. Our being born an Aboriginal is so complex, because you either fit in or you don't fit in with this one or that one, or you know language or you don't know language, or you've got culture or you haven't got culture. And it makes things so difficult for the individual. You have to build a special kind of resilience to get through all of that and the trauma. So you're on a back foot. As soon as you're born an Aboriginal person, you're on a back foot. All the historical and generational trauma is immediately yours. You inherit that. So if you have parents that have also inherited that, and they don't have that resilience or the know-how to instill confidence and compassion and determination and all of those things, then you are very challenged with everything in life, from getting out of the welfare system to forging out a career. And I have non-Indigenous people saying to me, well, why do you even think about those things? Why can't you just move forward without all of that baggage and without all of that thought? Well, it's easier said than done.
Of course it is.
It's like trying to tell a person that's in a domestic violence relationship to
Why don't you
just
just leave? Yeah, and we hear that often, don't we?
Yes, or telling us to just get over it, which are favourites to a lot of people. So as an Aboriginal person, it is very challenging because there are all of those things. And when we were brought up in that way, and in a time when to not draw attention to yourself and to not have children taken off of you, or to not be in the spotlight of the authorities, you would always try and please people. So there's a lot of us that are people pleasers.
Yes.
And we're always there trying to please someone else so that we put ourselves last. And like a lot of people say, well, that's a part of our culture anyway, because we're such a giving person. And you'll see Nana with 12 kids in tow because their mothers and fathers are out doing something else. So it has its own special challenges being an Aboriginal person with all of that
Those layers. There's so many layers.
Yes, there's so many layers.
Sharon, you mentioned building resilience. How did you build resilience as a child?
I think that happened from looking at the Noongar family, but also from my dad's family. And I always attribute my dad to being the person that he is because of all the trauma that he came through. And he was always very careful not to bleed on everybody else. But while he didn't do that, he did bleed on us a bit, but he also, as children, but he also taught us to always work hard for what we wanted, and that another day would always bring a new set of directions, of new beginnings, so that it didn't matter what happened yesterday, we could always have a new beginning, we could always make a new path. He was always a person that always had a backup plan, and I think that a lot of us in my family have always grown up with that, to have a backup plan.
It's a good advice.
Yeah, so we always fell on our feet, never mind what we tried to do or where we went, and we always looked at everything as an experience, whether it was a relationship or a failed, if we went and lived somewhere and we thought, oh no, that job's not working and this place is not home, that's okay. It's been a really good experience. Let's just turn that page and go back to where we're familiar and regroup and see where we can go to next.
You talked about some of the wisdom or phrases that your family sort of warmed your table with, and you told me there was a phrase, can you dig it?
Yeah.
Tell me about that, Sharon.
He just always had said that phrase, can you dig it? It'd be for anything. It'd be like if he was sitting down having a few drinks and he would get all philosophical, and the last bit he'd tag on was, can you dig it? Like, can you really understand?
Yeah. It's almost like from the 1960s. So can you dig this, man?
Yeah, exactly. And that was his phrase. And he had a few of them. He had a few good ones. There was another one about a wet paper bag, but
tell me that one.
Oh no, that's a bit.
It's a bit rude.
Yeah, it's a bit rude. He'd say someone couldn't do something if he was in a wet paper bag and trying to get out. And, yeah, but he was he was way before his time. He used to go out with geologists and read the ground and pick up rocks and know what they were, while the geologist would be flicking through his little book trying to find it, and he'd just know there was it was ingrained in him.
Innate, yeah.
Yeah, and even to the point when he did have a partner, and they had a plane, and they used to fly at night, and he would know where to fly and how to get home, even though the other fella would be lost, completely lost.
There's so much, and look, it keeps coming up over and over again, Sharon, in the conversations that I have, that finally it seems society is saying, oh, we need to tap into all of that wisdom from our Aboriginal Indigenous elders, because there's so much that we can learn about sustainability. There's so much we can learn about fire and how to manage fire in a climate changed world. There's so much we can learn about feeding ourselves off the land. There's so much we need to learn about everything.
Yeah.
There's so much wisdom within the continuing culture of the Aboriginal culture of 60,000 odd years of, you see, the Roman Empire's fallen and every other every other society has fallen, but the Aboriginal culture continues. What is the magic within there that we're all missing? I mean, that's a great big philosophical question, but there's so much within the culture that, geez, I wish we listened 200 years ago.
Yeah. I think it's really important to acknowledge that we did things in our own time and we did things very quietly and slowly. It's not a big race to get anywhere. So I think that is very important. And it was a lot simpler. We didn't have fancy things. We moved with the seasons. We ate with the seasons. We enjoyed our surroundings. We looked at the stars and the sky and the ground and everything aligned, the waterways, and we have a deep respect for all of that. And I think in the world that we're in today, everything is very fast.
Yes.
And we're not taking that time to look and learn and listen and be like our ancestors or our old people. And I think that's really damaging to not only our spiritual well-being, our mental well-being, our physical well-being, but also the environment that we live in. Yeah.
That's so true and so wise, Sharon. And I guess that takes me to the understanding within the culture, the Aboriginal culture of death and the rituals and the importance of the entry and exit into this world, and something that you're now specialising in.
Yeah. So I came about this like 22 years ago when my brother-in-law died, and I took him back to Marble Bar to bury him. And I've always had a relationship with death, in that growing up we have people die every week or two. There's lots of deaths in our community. So I grew up with losing aunties and uncles in quick succession. So I thought I had no aunties or uncles left in my mum and dad's side. Over time, with the introduction of the white culture and funerals and death, and the introduction of funeral directors, a lot of death was taken out of the home and out of the families and not being able to bury back on country.
Right.
So in turn, I think people became afraid, because when something's taken away, you can almost turn fearful of it.
Yes.
So I think that's what happened with death. And with a lot of our cultures, because we're so diverse and so different, many language groups do things differently for their dead. And I recall reading about when my grandfather died, my uncle had put all of his stuff in his old car and burnt it, which was, I think, was the way back then. They would put the remains of someone that had passed away in a hollow tree or a hollow log, or if the old person was sick or if there was a sick person, they'd leave food with them, and because we were nomadic, if that person caught up, then it was
meant to be.
It was meant to be. It was joyful. But if they didn't, they were released with love to the ancestors and to the dream time. Yeah. So I think in coming back to the original question, I'm just trying to help bridge the gap between the living and the deceased, and help that process of grieving and letting go, and for the spiritual side of the person that's died to help them let go and move on as well. Yeah.
So how are your funerals quite different to a funeral that would otherwise have been conducted by someone who doesn't understand the Aboriginal culture? So what are some of the things that are asked by these families that you're working with and you're grieving with, helping them through their grief? What sort of cultural traditions do they like to embed within the funeral?
Having me there, it's allowed them to be comfortable enough to say, we want to do our own funeral. So I'm basically just there to walk alongside to make sure that they are comfortable in what they're doing. And as a funeral director, my job is to ensure that we're following the legal side of things. So if family want to dress their family in a particular way, I can do that. There are other cultural things that we do for families that I won't talk about here, but I can do that. It's not, they're not disregarded.
Yes.
So I'm able to do that for the family. And
So some particular cultural
particular
aspects
cultural
of
aspects,
law and of
yes,
and
yes,
healing and that
yeah,
what's appropriate. So
yes,
because you are an Aboriginal woman, you're familiar with
yes,
those types of rituals and that understanding so that you can actually they're comfortable asking you about them and
yes,
comfortable saying this
yes,
is really important for this person.
yeah, yeah. So in turn, I've learnt so much, and it really is an honour
Yes.
to be with different families and different language groups and learn and be taught. It's almost like passing on that knowledge. So I am hopeful that more people will come alongside and be a part of this so that we can start doing our funerals right across Western Australia, and so that it's not so much of a niche.
And your funeral service is called Towards the Dreaming.
Yeah.
Can you describe to me what is the dreaming for people who may not understand Aboriginal culture? What does the dreaming represent?
So the dreaming means many different things for many different people. We always say when someone passes away that they've gone to the dream time and they're in the dream time. And some people think it's final. Some people think it's infinite. So it is many different things for many different people. It probably is like a heaven,
Yes,
but for us,
yes,
because of those past acts and authorities, and we had Christianity always in different areas. So there are a lot of Aboriginal people that are brought up in that Christian faith, but there are others that aren't. They just have that spiritual side and the spirituality, and then some are mixed together. And that's what we always say, see you in the dream time. And I came across those when I was sitting down thinking about a business name. That's what I came up with, and thinking, oh, well, that's really great because we always say that. And I'm helping people towards the dreaming.
Just going back to some of the cultural rituals that you might be able to talk about that you do in your funerals, things like I was reading smoking ceremonies.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me the importance of a smoking ceremony.
Well, the smoking ceremony means, again, it means different things for different people. In the north of Australia, it is generally used on homes. Before houses, bricks and mortar, we lived in humpies and bough sheds and under trees. So you could just move. You wouldn't need to be within that vicinity where someone's died. But now that there's bricks and mortar, people smoke the house to help spirits go into the dreaming, and people are smoked to take spirits away from them if their spirit has attached itself to particular people. So that's used mainly for that, to help the spirit on. Yeah.
And the smoking ceremonies, and I've had the privilege of having been at a smoking ceremony for the Kids Bridge being
Yeah.
connected between the Children's Hospital and Kings Park. And this, it was the very first smoking ceremony I'd ever been to, and I didn't realise how smoky you get.
Yes.
You're pretty
Yeah.
smoky by the end of it. When they say smoke, there's a lot of smoke.
Yeah, there is.
And that's a wonderful. It really does feel like a cleansing, or a, you can't miss it. You can't miss the smoke.
No.
And are there specific leaves and branches that you should use in a smoking ceremony?
Yes, and again, it's different for different cultures and language groups within the Aboriginal culture. I understand down here they use eucalyptus leaves, a particular type, but even with our Noongar mob, there's people that believe that it should just be men that do the smoking,
right.
and then in some other areas, the women are allowed to do the smoking.
When you say do the smoking, as in conduct the smoking, or go through the smoke?
No, conduct the smoking.
But anyone
can walk
through
the smoke.
Yes.
But just conducting it, there's differences about who should and who shouldn't do it. And I've never performed it myself, and I don't think it's for me to say who can or who couldn't, but it's just important to point out that there is differences.
Yes, and there are, and that's something that's quite clear with the Aboriginal culture as well. For example, I believe, and please correct me if I've got this completely wrong, that the didgeridoo is only allowed to be played by a man.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's amongst Aboriginal people, that's a no-brainer right across Australia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I remember seeing a documentary a few years ago where a community was established by the government in the north, and everybody was corralled to come and live in that particular community, and it was just such a difficult merge of different cultures, different skin groups, different beliefs, and this thinking that all Aboriginal people are the same is so flawed in the way that a lot of government policies are written, and in the way that we just think, because we're not in tune, or we're not asking the questions of people like yourself about what the specific aspects of your culture within the Aboriginal sort of culture is.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not the same fit for everybody in any of the things that we do. Australia spends billions and billions of dollars on health programs, housing programs, employment programs. There's still a disparity. There's still a lot of people that are missing out. We still have poverty within the Aboriginal population. We still have the highest incarceration rate, the highest unemployment. We still have so many shortfalls in health. We've got the highest rate of kidney disease, renal failure, heart failure. It's so sad. It shouldn't be happening, and it's because we're all being treated like we should be treated the same. But it isn't. It's different. There's differences in all of our cultures, and there needs to be a unique way of treating each of the issues, so that those people over on community A thrive and strive the same as people over on community B. Yeah.
I've just recently heard something from a friend who said, as we're moving forward into the future, one of the what used to be the golden rule was treat others as you'd like to be treated.
Yeah.
But he said now it's actually treat people as they would like and want to be treated.
Yes.
And I just found that little nuance of language, putting that sentence in a completely different way makes so much sense, and exactly what you've just said. We can't just treat them how we want to be treated. Yes, with respect and with all of those, sort of high values, of course. Yeah. But treat people as they want to be treated, as they need to be treated, which respects their own culture and their own interpretation and nuance of what is meaningful for them.
Very definitely. And it's the same in death, like around what I do. It's about meeting people on their country and meeting them how they want to do their family's funeral. So I'm at the back end, I'm at the funeral stage, but before we get to that funeral, we hope that all of the services and provision of services to that person is how they would have wanted it and how the community would have wanted it, so that by the time they get to me, there isn't all the hardships that they're having, and that when they move on from that funeral, they can move on knowing that the trauma of losing that person has not been in vain. They've got the strength to go on to be more for the family that are here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And are those steps actually in place now, Sharon, before they get to you? Are they in place?
No, because we're still dying too young.
Yes.
And that's because of lifestyle and all of the things that aren't there, like the mental health isn't being addressed appropriately, how they need it to be addressed. The models that are non-Indigenous models aren't working on our people. So I just see that we're still lacking in so many areas.
So that then, I guess, means that the people that you do work with, there is an enormous amount of trauma still within them at the time of the funeral.
There's lots of trauma, particularly around how to pay for the funeral, and so it extends the trauma. The person's died younger than what they should have.
And possibly in circumstances that
are preventable.
Are preventable, yes.
Very preventable. Double pneumonia, if a person has adequate housing, shelter, warmth, food, you're very likely not to get double pneumonia in the first place. If renal failure, renal failure, diabetes, lifestyle, again, it's about food, education, warmth, housing, all of that stuff. So it can be very traumatic, very heartbreaking for people.
Yes. So how do you hold that space, Sharon? How do you hold them within that?
I've always felt that I've been given some gifts. I describe myself a bit as a death doula, funeral director.
Yes.
And I've always had a relationship with death, I think, because of all the deaths in my family and around my family and within the culture. Of course, I grew up afraid of death like a lot of other people do and children do. And I just remember over the years learning a lot about spirituality and what that brings, and particularly within the Aboriginal culture, because it's very deep and it's very... I don't want to romanticize it because it's not in that space at all, but
there's a deep wisdom.
There's a deep wisdom that comes with it as well. And I think for me, as a funeral director, I'm there to provide a strength for the families to be able to help them express what they need to get through that period, through that sadness. And you never give up grieving for a person, but you do learn to walk with it, and you still learn to take that spiritual side with you of that person. And I think that's very important. Like I still have my little cry, and my sadness for the whole families and our whole race, the sadness for our whole race, because we don't throw back. We are dying out. And I think that if I can help in some way to preserve that and to help people walk with it and to be more akin with it, then then I feel like I'm playing a big part in helping with our mob move forward.
There's a lot of healing within that.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel very privileged to be in this space as well and learn as much as I can from other funeral directors, but learn in a way that I can be different and I can be more within our culture. And I do this by learning a lot about other cultures and looking how they do things and how they celebrate the life of the person that's passed. And it's fascinating. It's a fascinating subject right around the world. And just the different traditions and norms people have, it's amazing. And this is what I try and encourage our mob to do. You know, be unique. If you want to colour inside and outside of that coffin or casket, you do that.
Yeah.
You do it. This is this person's last day on earth. If you want to spend 4 hours with them, spend 4 hours with them.
Sharon, I'd love to understand your road to becoming a funeral director.
Yeah.
I know that it was sort of a moment 22 years ago when you did your first funeral that you sort of started thinking about the opportunity to bridge culture and ritual and appropriate sort of farewells into the dreaming for Aboriginal people. But then what set you on, I guess, the path of study, and how did that manifest for you?
I've done family funerals. So the first was my brother-in-law, then my dad, and then my nephew down here in Perth, and then my other brother-in-law back on country again in Port Hedland. And then I realised that with each one, the difficulties around purchasing a coffin and being able to have the same things that other funeral directors have, the car to transport my loved one to their resting place. It's really hard because the funeral industry is a very closed industry, and if you are not a registered or licensed funeral director, it's nigh on difficult to try and purchase a coffin within the industry. You can't.
You can't buy one?
You can't. We had to buy the coffin online, and it came from Melbourne, from Coffin World, and so it doubled in cost to get it here. But it was also a wonderful experience because when the truck turned up, all the kids came out and they all helped carry it into the lounge room.
Right.
And we put it in the lounge room and they all helped unpack it. And then we opened it and we all spoke about it. We all had a look at it. We all got familiar with it. And yes, Uncle's going to go in there, and then we'll take Uncle. So it was a whole learning experience, and it was really a really intimate time with all our grannies in our family. And so I thought there has to be a better way for me to do this. So I'm going to try and become a funeral director. The lady that I hired to drive the hearse, because I couldn't get a hearse, I couldn't hire a hearse, there's no such thing.
You've now got one.
I've now got two.
How exciting.
I've got two.
And they've been smoked, haven't they?
They've been smoked, yeah, they have.
Fabulous.
And they're the oldest hearse on the planet, but they're beautiful old girls.
Beautiful.
And they do the job well. So I finally found a lady that agreed to hire the hearse for my nephew's funeral, and we got to talking. She drove. I couldn't drive her hearse, but she drove, and during that drive to the cemetery and to pick him up and to take him to the church for the service, she said, I can do my work experience with her.
Fabulous.
As a funeral director, because she had the same problems when she wanted to bury her father-in-law. And so I did my work experience here in Perth with this beautiful lady who had just started out as well. And that is that's it. That's how I started. Yeah. There's lots of regulations in Western Australia around being a funeral director, and I think that's not a bad thing because it's ingrained in tradition and integrity and love and all of those things.
Yes.
It's just it is a really respectable industry to be in, and that has given me good grounding to be able to get out there and help our mob and to have funerals in their way, in how they want to, and have the understanding that, yes, we do have cultural differences and I can help them do those things. Like with a funeral we had down in Boddington, there was culture. There was only one song that was by Dolly Parton.
Right.
And then the rest of the time it was Noongar singing and Noongar clapping sticks, and they even had a didgeridoo along, which was beautiful, and the smoking ceremony and dancing, and that was wonderful. That was a real celebration of life, and the family gave me permission to talk about it and to share it on social media. So other people will be able to see that this is what's possible.
Yes.
And it's okay to celebrate your person, and it's okay to share your culture in that person and the love for that person.
Part of the work that you do, Sharon, is clearly in bridging this gap for Aboriginal people in having a culturally appropriate funeral and farewell.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the other, I guess, gap that you're bridging and the information you're bringing to Aboriginal people is this understanding of what society expects from wills and probate and all sorts of, all of those really difficult conversations sometimes. But how are you managing that element of talking about death?
What I've been trying to do is get around and talk to as many people as I can just about the whole process of wills and dying without a will, and the painfulness of probate, because it is really painful and it can be long and drawn out, and there's lots of documents involved and toing and froing. So you need to be able to have a will and to have people that you can rely on at that time to go through all those processes. At the moment, I'm finding that if there are Aboriginal people that die in nursing homes, then the public trustee will come forward without. They do hold a bit of understanding for Aboriginal people because they know that sometimes there's not always a next of kin or there's not a will. So they're really good in being able to work with funeral directors and families to access funds to put the loved one at rest. But I like going around to different groups who sometimes they have oldie groups and they meet, and so I'll go and just have a chat about what it means to have a will. Do they know what happens when they die, where they go, who looks after them at that stage, what they can do if they die at home, what things are necessary, what things are unnecessary if they die in the hospital. So these are all things that I like going out and talking to people about before they die so that they can be a little bit more prepared and lessen the heartache, I suppose, for those that are left behind.
Is death an easy conversation?
No, it's not, but I find that with our mob, people like to lighten things a bit. So there's always a few jokes around, and the old people don't get that uncomfortable, but they ask questions that they want to
Sure.
ask. They all ask me some curly ones, and that's okay. I don't mind that either. But sometimes it is difficult to talk about. I remember in one instance when I went to visit someone that was passing away, I took him fish and chips, and we had a great conversation, and he was adamant that he wanted certain things done for him, and we were able to agree. He was able to pass away knowing that those things were going to be done. So it worked out well for everybody.
You're also being supported in a way because you're a funeral director, but you're also a small business. So you're a businesswoman.
Yeah.
And the Wirra Fund, or Woolwich.
Yeah, the Woolwich Hub.
Woolwich Hub is really integral to helping you in your small business.
They have been fantastic. And my coach, I was lucky I walked in at the same time that Raylene Bellotti walked out of her office, and I explained to them what I wanted to do, and she just pointed at me and looked at the receptionist and said, "Book her into me, please."
Oh, I want her.
Yeah. So I was really lucky to get her as well.
How fabulous. So just a little bit of background. So the Woolwich Foundation, which used to be called the Wirrapunda Foundation or the Wirra Hub. So the essence behind that is that it's a foundation specifically to support and ignite Aboriginal businesses, small businesses, and to support them with business coaching and opportunities for networks and to get a start.
Very definitely. So the hub does that. The foundation does a whole gamut of services that help Aboriginal people move forward. Yeah.
So you find that you're spending your time between Perth and Headland. Is that what's happening in your world at the moment?
That's what's happening in my world at the moment. I'm the flying funeral director. It's working, and I don't mind doing that because for me it's an honour to be able to be with people and help people through this time and do whatever I can. Yeah. So I've been around talking to heaps of people, especially about my long-term vision, the long-term goal, which is to turn the funeral business into a foundation and go not-for-profit so that we can attract the funding for people to be able to have funerals for free.
Yes.
I have this thing about it being our country and our resources, and it shouldn't be so heartbreaking to have to find all that money to give someone a send-off. So I'm being connected with like-minded people who think the same, and hopefully we will work towards a not-for-profit funeral service that can be in all the big regions and can help people through this very traumatic time.
It's such an honourable dream, and I wish you every success with that, Sharon. It's been an absolute honour and privilege to have you around my warm table today, so thank you for making time for me and helping me understand much more about the Aboriginal culture and the special elements that make it important to respect the culture up until the very, very end when we're saying goodbye to a loved one.
Thank you very much for having me around your warm table.
You've been listening to My Warm Table with Sonia Nolan. In Italian, a tavola calda is a warm and welcoming table where you can share big ideas, friendship, laughter and life. So much happens around the kitchen table, and I wanted to amplify it here in this podcast. My aim is to feed your mind and soul through smart conversations with heart. No topic is off limits, but good table manners rule. I hope you'll join us each week as we set the table for my extraordinary guests who will let you feast on their deep knowledge, life experiences, and wise insights. Let's keep the conversation flowing. Please subscribe to the My Warm Table podcast and share it with your friends and networks. Perhaps if they're new to podcasting, take a moment to show them how to download and subscribe so they don't miss an episode either. I'd also love you to join our community on Facebook. You'll find the group at My Warm Table Podcast. Your support is very much appreciated so that together we can eat, think, and be merry.